Welcome to True Echo, where real moments spark real change. Today's story isn't just about the law, it's about the quiet power of grace, the danger of assumptions, and how a single courtroom exchange left a veteran judge forever changed. What started as a routine traffic fine turned into a stunning moment of reckoning for everyone watching. And the man at the center of it? He never raised his voice. This is a story you won't forget. It was just after 9 a.m. in Courtroom 2B of the Maricopa County Municipal Courthouse in Tempe, Arizona. Judge Rosalind Drexler sat at the bench, her robe crisp, sleeves pushed up slightly, everything about her posture radiating control. The docket was full, the stack of cases thick. She'd been here before, 27 years of rulings, trials, and closed files. She moved like a conductor, each case a note, each sentence a beat in the symphony of municipal law. Her philosophy was simple: keep the train moving and justice doesn't derail. She'd made thousands of decisions over her career, most within minutes. Today felt no different, until she called the next name on the list. Mr. Lionel Creston, she read without a flicker of recognition. From the benches, a tall black man rose, calm and self-assured. He wore a charcoal gray suit, cleanly pressed, briefcase in hand. His presence was composed but unassuming. He didn't slouch. Didn't fidget. Just walked forward with quiet dignity and stood at the defendant's table, his gaze steady and respectful. Judge Drexler barely looked up. "You were clocked doing 62 in a 35 on McClintock Drive. That's excessive by city code. The fine is $450. She was already turning the page to the next case. But Lionel didn't move. He cleared his throat just enough to be heard. "Your Honor," he said, calm and clear, "before we conclude, I'd like to offer some clarification." Rosalind paused. She'd heard it all before: excuses, delays, theatrics. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You want to contest the fine?" "No," Lionel replied. "But I believe context is important. And it might change the way this is remembered." That made her stop. He continued without bravado. "I was driving that route because I was late to the U.S. District Courthouse. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Lionel Creston. I was scheduled to lead a federal briefing on the Marston case." For a moment, the room didn't react. Then, slowly, you could feel it, something shifted. The name. The title. Rosalind blinked. The Marston case. She sat back slightly, her hands frozen mid-motion. "Yes," Lionel said, answering her unspoken question. "Racketeering and trafficking. My co-counsel was out sick that morning. I had to present both arguments." She looked back down at the docket. The name was there, Lionel Creston. She'd seen that name before, in legal journals, in briefs. He'd delivered a lecture on interagency coordination just 3 months ago. She'd been invited. She hadn't gone. And now here he was. Standing in her courtroom like an ordinary defendant. Except he wasn't ordinary. Not at all. He didn't gloat. Didn't raise his voice. Just stood there, the weight of his words speaking louder than anything else. The courtroom was utterly still. Rosalind, so used to controlling the rhythm, said nothing. "You may go," she finally said, voice more careful than before. He gave a nod, respectful, not smug, and turned to leave. Whispers followed him out. Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. Phones were set down. People looked up. "That's him," someone said. "The prosecutor from the Marston case." Rosalind sat still, her fingers tightening slightly around her pen. The next name was called. A teenager in sagging jeans stepped forward. But Rosalind's mind was still back there, on Lionel. She hadn't even asked why he was speeding. Hadn't asked anything. And now everyone in the room had seen it. Her mistake. Not just legal. Human. Rosalind's hand hovered over her docket for the briefest second longer than usual, a pause only the most attentive courtroom observer might have noticed. She moved to the next case, but her voice, usually clipped, sharp, had softened by a degree. She didn't stumble, but she wasn't marching anymore either. The courtroom that had always felt like a stage she mastered now felt like it had turned its eyes back on her. Outside, Lionel stepped into the blazing Arizona heat. He adjusted his briefcase strap, exhaled, and walked calmly toward the courthouse parking lot. He wasn't rattled. If anything, he seemed resigned. He didn't slam his car door or mutter frustrations under his breath. This wasn't the first time someone had misread him based on appearance, and it wouldn't be the last. He knew what rooms thought of him before he spoke, before he had a chance to explain why he was there. He checked his phone, 2 missed calls from his paralegal, 1 from the Deputy U.S. Attorney's office. Work didn't stop for moments like this. Back inside, the courtroom returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. But in the break room just before noon, the atmosphere had shifted. Rosalind entered quietly, her lunch in hand, and headed straight for the far end of the table, near the vending machine where few people sat. The conversations dipped in volume when she entered, not silent, just careful. No one said her name out loud, but she heard it anyway. You're kidding, she didn't even realize who he was. Lionel Creston. I'd fold the docket if I saw that name. Guess even she blanks sometimes. She unpacked her container of carrot sticks and hummus and kept her face neutral, her eyes lowered. She hadn't built her career on casual office chatter. She'd built it on efficiency, on control. She didn't need to be liked, only respected. But this time, the hum of judgment scraped a little deeper than usual. Judge Eric Bloom, 10 years her junior and far more relaxed in his robe, stood nearby with a sandwich in one hand, gossip in the other. She fined Lionel Creston like he was late for gym class, he muttered to a junior clerk with a chuckle. His voice wasn't loud, but Rosalind caught every word. Their eyes met briefly. Bloom's grin faltered, then disappeared altogether. Rosalind capped her lunch and stood. She wasn't angry. She was uncomfortable. Exposed. The law library was quieter. Safer. She found a corner table between the Federal Reporter series and the Arizona Code. Her thoughts, however, refused to be catalogued. Why hadn't she recognized him? Why hadn't she asked anything? She remembered the 1990s, the early years, when every glance in her direction was a question, "Are you sure you belong on the bench?" She'd answered with steel. No time for pleasantries, no tolerance for errors. That armor had served her well. But now she was starting to see its cost. Later that afternoon, back in her chambers, her clerk Rita entered with a neat folder and a raised brow. "Full docket on Lionel Creston," Rita said. "You asked." Rosalind nodded and accepted it. The weight of the folder was deceptive. Inside were his cases, 16 major ones in the last 8 years. Federal, interagency. Organized crime. Trafficking. Money laundering. All of it meticulously prosecuted. "You want the highlights?" Rita asked gently. "No," Rosalind said. "I want to read it all." Rita paused at the door. "Everyone's talking about it. Not just here. The circuit's buzzing." "I figured," Rosalind replied. She spent the next hour flipping through Lionel's filings. His voice came through even on the page, measured, precise, quietly forceful. She was halfway through his summary on the Marston indictment when something clicked deep inside her. Not just embarrassment, but recognition. He reminded her of herself, before she hardened. At 10:45 a.m. the next morning, she walked into the courthouse's break room again. Judge Bloom was already there, stirring creamer into his coffee. He gave her a cordial smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning." "Morning," she said, pouring her own cup. A thick silence followed. Then Bloom cleared his throat. "I read Creston's filing on Marston. Impressive work." She nodded. "He ever argue in your court?" she asked casually. "Twice. Polite. Methodical. The kind of guy you don't forget." She didn't answer. Just walked back to chambers and closed the door a little too firmly. She stared at the folder again. There was a yellow tab labeled Opening Remarks. She flipped to it. The first line stopped her cold. "When power is used with integrity, it doesn't need to raise its volume, it just has to show up." She sat back in her chair, staring at that sentence. Lionel hadn't raised his voice. He didn't have to. And somehow, that still hit harder than any formal reprimand. That night, Judge Rosalind Drexler sat on her worn leather couch, a law journal open in her lap and a glass of Pinot gripped loosely in her hand. The TV flickered quietly in the background, playing some old procedural drama she wasn't watching. She'd read the same paragraph in the journal 3 times without comprehending a word. Her mind was stuck, circling a single moment like a hawk over prey, the second Lionel Creston had said his name in her courtroom. Not with arrogance. Not even with frustration. Just with truth. It wasn't just the name drop. It was everything that followed. The shift in the room. The way silence had crept in. And how she, for once, had been the one caught off guard. The last time she'd felt that kind of shift was in 1994, her second year on the bench. An older attorney had called her "young lady" in front of a packed gallery after she overruled his objection. She remembered the flush in her cheeks, the quiet gasps from the courtroom, and how hard she'd clenched her jaw to keep from reacting. That was the day she decided, no more softness. No second chances. No time wasted. She had built her career on structure, efficiency, and emotional distance. The courtroom wasn't a place for sentiment, it was a machine. But Lionel had walked in and quietly, without ever breaking that machine, shown her something was wrong with how she'd programmed it. The house was quiet. Her daughter, Ava, lived 2 states away. They didn't speak often. Not because they were estranged, just distant. Drifting, like so many relationships that hadn't been properly tended. Ava used to sit at the kitchen table while Rosalind reviewed case files. She'd ask about school or the occasional friend drama. But when Ava asked about her mom's work, Rosalind had always kept answers short. Protecting her, she thought. Or maybe hiding. She glanced over at a framed photo of Ava at her college graduation, smiling, surrounded by friends. Rosalind hadn't taken many photos herself that day. She'd been preoccupied with a pending appeal. Her phone buzzed. "Ava, hey mom, just checking in. You good?" Rosalind stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. "Rosalind, all good. Just tired. How are you?" The reply came quickly. "Ava, I'm okay. Long week. We'll call soon." Rosalind, "Yes. I'd like that." She set the phone down, leaned back, and closed her eyes. What if she'd been too proud for too long? What if the armor that had served her so well in court had kept her blind outside of it? Lionel Creston hadn't tried to put her in her place. He hadn't even mentioned the mistake again. That's what made it sting. He could have embarrassed her. Could have demanded an apology, filed a complaint, gone public. But instead, he had just left a mirror behind, quiet and unflinching. 3 days later, Rosalind did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She attended a court proceeding that wasn't on her docket. The high-profile pretrial hearing for the Marston case was being held at the downtown federal courthouse. She had received the invite weeks ago. Never RSVP'd. But now, she found herself slipping into the back row of courtroom 4D, taking a seat beside a retired judge she vaguely recognized. No one acknowledged her. All eyes were focused on the front, where Lionel Creston stood, sleeves precisely pressed, posture still, notes minimal. He wasn't performing. He was working. Cross-examining a forensic accountant who'd clearly underestimated how prepared Lionel would be. "So Mr. Foley," Lionel said, his voice smooth and firm, "when you say the withdrawals were unusual, do you mean in pattern, amount, or origin?" The accountant fumbled. Mostly pattern, I guess." "You guess?" Lionel asked, not confrontational, but with just enough weight to make the point. "I mean, pattern. They didn't match salary cycles. They always occurred within 24 hours of transfers from Shell accounts." "Panessa Logistics and Kepler Trades?" "Yes." "Linked by registered agent?" "Yes." Lionel nodded once. No further questions. Rosalind hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. He had done something more powerful than commanding attention, he anchored it. After the hearing recessed, she stayed seated. She had no plan to speak with him. She just wanted to see, really see, the man she had failed to recognize. As he exited the courtroom, their eyes met. There was no smile. No nod. Just acknowledgement. He disappeared down the corridor, his team trailing behind him. Rosalind remained there a moment longer, coat still folded in her lap, a strange ache sitting behind her ribs. She had seen hundreds of skilled attorneys in her career, but never had one said so much by doing so little. The corridor outside courtroom 4D was lined with tall windows overlooking a gray, overcast Tempe morning. Rain streaked diagonally across the glass like tired brushstrokes. Judge Rosalind Drexler stood silently, watching a group of defense lawyers huddle near the elevators. Her reflection in the glass seemed older today, not tired, just real. Less armor. More woman. Behind her, two junior prosecutors spoke in hushed tones. They didn't see her standing there, or maybe they did and assumed she wouldn't react. "I still don't know how he keeps all that in his head," one said. "He's been up since 4. Saw him in the war room this morning rehearsing. Lionel doesn't just show up, he builds the whole case around the room before he steps into it." Their admiration wasn't fawning. It was earned. And it stung. Because Rosalind hadn't seen any of that in her courtroom. She hadn't imagined that level of discipline behind the man she dismissed with barely a glance. By the time she returned to her chambers, a manila envelope sat on her desk. Unmarked, save for a printed label. Judicial Review Submission, Assistant U.S. Attorney Lionel Creston. Her clerk, Rita, hovered in the doorway. "It came through the circuit clerk's office an hour ago," she said. "I didn't read it. Just logged the receipt." Rosalind nodded once. "Thanks." When the door closed, she let the envelope sit on the desk for a long moment. It stared back at her like a question waiting to be answered. Eventually, she opened it. 2 pages. Typed. Signed. "During my appearance before Judge Drexler, I was issued a citation without an opportunity to provide context or explanation. While I respect the efficiency of municipal proceedings, I believe the circumstances highlight a need for renewed attention to procedural discretion." It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't angry. It was careful. Clear. Truth, stripped of venom. Assumptions, intentional or not, can shape outcomes in ways we often overlook. I submit this not as a grievance, but as a reminder of what's at stake when we let systems move faster than people. At the end, he had even thanked her. Genuinely. Rosalind leaned back, eyes closed. He wasn't trying to embarrass her. He wasn't calling her out. He was holding space for reflection. She stood, walked toward the window, and stared at the parking lot below. The late afternoon sun had dipped behind tired commercial buildings. For the first time in years, she didn't reach for precedent or protocol. She reached for the phone. The number was printed at the bottom of the letter. U.S. Attorney Creston's direct office line. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. Would he take her seriously? Would he pick up? She dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. Then. U.S. Attorney Creston's office. Rosalind steadied her voice. This is Judge Rosalind Drexler. I'd like to speak with Mr. Creston. It's personal. Regarding the letter he submitted. There was a pause. Please hold. A few seconds passed. Then, Lionel's voice came on the line. Judge Drexler, he said. His tone was unreadable. Not cold. Just cautious. I received your letter, she began. I wanted to thank you for it. You didn't have to write it, but you did. And it landed. Another pause. I appreciate that, Lionel said simply. And I meant every word. I made a mistake, she said. Not in issuing the citation, but in how I handled it. I'm not calling as a judge right now. I'm calling as a person who forgot to slow down. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was respectful. Full. Thank you for saying that, Lionel replied after a moment. Most people wouldn't. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Growth rarely makes noise, he added. Sometimes the smallest admissions change the biggest rooms. When they hung up, Rosalind sat at her desk and stared at the file for another minute before finally filing it away, not to forget, but to remember. That Monday, the courthouse felt the same. Security checks. Coffee cups. Shuffling heels. But Rosalind felt different. She greeted the bailiff by name. Asked her clerk if her son's cold had improved. She didn't hover. Didn't force it. But her walls weren't up quite so high. Inside her chambers, she reviewed the morning's cases. One caught her eye, Ava Lambert, 21, nursing student. 2 part-time jobs. A citation for expired registration. A week ago, she might have skimmed it and ruled on the spot. Today, she picked up the phone. Can we bring Miss Lambert in 5 minutes early, she asked her clerk. I'd like to speak with her before the hearing. At 9 a.m., Ava Lambert stood nervously before the bench. Her hands shook. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Miss Lambert, Rosalind said gently. I see you've been cited for expired registration. Can you tell me more about that? The young woman blinked in surprise. I didn't have the money. My paycheck was late. I've been covering my mom's meds. I appreciate your honesty, Rosalind said. Let's set a payment date that works for you. We'll waive the late penalty. Focus on getting your registration handled. We'll keep this off your record. Ava's eyes welled. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. The next case moved forward. But something had shifted. Not the law. The lens. The change in courtroom 2B wasn't dramatic. There was no sweeping declaration, no grand announcement. But those who paid attention noticed it. Rosalind's bench was still orderly. Her ruling still precise. But there was something different in the air, a slower cadence to her voice, a readiness to listen before deciding. She wasn't any less firm. Just, more present. That afternoon, her phone buzzed during lunch. Lionel Creston. She stepped outside before answering. Mr. Creston, she said, more relaxed than she expected. Judge Drexler, he replied warmly. I hope this isn't a bad time. Not at all, she said. Just stepped out for air. I wanted to thank you again, for the call. And for what you said. It's rare in our line of work. Rosalind leaned against the warm brick wall of the courtyard. I wasn't proud of how I handled that hearing, she admitted. I don't get it wrong often. But when I do, I try to learn something. I believe you can, Lionel said. That's why I submitted the letter. Not to call you out. To hold the space, for reflection. There was a brief silence, the kind that feels fuller than words. Truthfully, Lionel added, I wasn't sure if you'd respond. Rosalind let out a short laugh, surprised at herself. Truthfully, neither was I. And for a fleeting moment, they both laughed. It wasn't familiar, and it wasn't personal. It was something else, respect, born from friction. You've got a reputation, you know, Lionel said after a pause. Do I? Yeah. Judge Drexler. Efficient. Fair. Sharp as hell. A little hard around the edges, but no one ever leaves your court confused about where they stand. She smiled, a real one this time. And you've got a reputation too. I try to earn it, he replied. Every day. She hesitated, then said something unexpected, even to herself. If you ever speak at another panel or symposium, I'd like to come. Not as a judge. Just as someone who wants to listen better. There was a pause. I'll hold you to that, Lionel said, his voice just a touch warmer. They hung up. Rosalind didn't rush back to her office. She stood there for a moment longer, watching two pigeons squabble over a crust of bread near the bench. Inside, the docket waited. But she didn't measure her time the same way anymore. 2 weeks later, Courtroom 2B still looked the same, but it felt entirely different. Not because of new paint or better lighting, but because Rosalind no longer viewed her cases as files to be closed. They were people to be understood. That morning, an older woman came forward with a parking violation dispute. She was in her 60s, nervous, holding grainy black and white photos printed on regular paper. In the past, Rosalind might have cut her off mid-sentence to keep the docket on pace. Today, she waited. Take your time, Rosalind said. The woman blinked, surprised. Then she explained her case. Her voice shook, but she pressed on. She'd parked outside a doctor's office. The curb markings were faded. Her photos made that clear. Rosalind ruled in her favor. Not out of pity, but because the evidence was sound. At the back of the courtroom, a young law clerk scribbled notes. Later that day, he whispered to a colleague, she's different lately. It's like, she's watching people now, not just their case files. And she was. At noon, back in chambers, Rosalind opened her email. A video link waited in her inbox, forwarded by her law clerk. The subject line read. Lionel Creston, Keynote, Western States Prosecutor Summit. She clicked. The title card read. Assumption and Authority, How Our Positions Shape and Distort Perception. Lionel stood at the podium, wearing a navy suit and no notes in sight. He looked comfortable, composed. The room leaned in before he even said a word. In courtrooms across the country, Lionel began, justice is often determined in less than 5 minutes. We see someone. We hear a charge. And before they even speak, we've decided who they are. Rosalind sat forward. It's not always out of malice. Sometimes it's habit. Sometimes pressure. Sometimes, it's just fatigue. But whatever the cause, the cost is always the same, people stop being people. They become paperwork. She paused the video. Her own reflection stared back at her from the black screen. She had done that. Countless times. Not because she meant to hurt anyone. But because it was easier. That afternoon, a teenage boy stood before her on a petty theft charge. First offense. Clean record. His mother sat in the gallery, tissue in hand, wringing it like it could keep her from breaking. Rosalind looked the boy in the eye. Tell me what happened, she said. He hesitated, then spoke. He hadn't tried to excuse it. He owned it. His mom had lost her job. He was trying to help in the wrong way. Rosalind listened. Fully. She gave him a diversion program, community service, counseling, and a reflection letter instead of a fine. As he left, his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Rosalind didn't respond out loud. But something shifted in her chest. That evening, as she walked to her car in the near-empty parking lot, she felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because the job had gotten easier, it hadn't. But because for the first time in a long while, she wasn't just performing justice. She was living it. The sky above Tempe that Friday afternoon was streaked in pastel oranges and deep lavender shadows. Rosalind Drexler walked slowly to her car, briefcase in hand, and for once didn't check the time. The courthouse had long since emptied out, clerks clocked out, attorneys heading to late lunches or early happy hours, but she wasn't in a rush. The day had been full, but not exhausting. Not in the usual way. She got into her car, started the engine, and was met with soft jazz playing from the radio. Normally, she'd flip the station or shut it off entirely. Not tonight. She let it play. She drove without glancing at the clock, headlights gliding over quiet neighborhoods, her mind still lingering on the courtroom, the boy from the afternoon, and the mother's grateful eyes. Something fundamental had shifted in her. Not in the law, not in the docket, not in the rules. In her. And that change wasn't loud, it was quiet. Steady. But it changed everything. The following week unfolded with the usual rhythms, case files, hearings, motions. But Rosalind noticed more hesitation in people's voices, more truth in their stories when she actually gave them space to tell it. She didn't rush through the noise. She listened. Then, on Friday afternoon, as she returned from a contentious custody hearing that had left both parents in tears, Rita appeared in her doorway again, manila envelope in hand. "Something came in," she said softly. "From the circuit clerk's office." "It's from Mr. Creston." Rosalind's throat tightened. "Thank you." She closed the door behind her and sat slowly at her desk. The envelope was simple. Plain. No posturing. Just a judicial review submission. Her hands shook ever so slightly as she peeled it open. 2 typed pages. "During my appearance before Judge Drexler, I was issued a citation without the opportunity to provide context or explanation. While I respect the necessity for procedural efficiency, I believe this incident underscores the need for renewed attention to discretion in summary judgments." There was no accusation. No complaint. This submission is not offered as a grievance, but as a reminder of what is lost when assumptions move faster than truth. And at the end, remarkably, "I thank Judge Drexler for her time and trust this note will be received in the spirit with which it is intended. Progress." Rosalind sat back, breath caught in her chest. He hadn't written to punish her. He wasn't flexing authority. He was inviting her to reflect. She stood and walked to the window, watching a leaf drift in lazy circles on the breeze outside. The sun was lowering behind the courthouse. That younger version of her, the woman who had fought to be respected, who wore severity like armor, still tugged at her, whispering to dismiss it, to maintain control. But the rest of her, the part that had stayed in courtroom 4D to watch Lionel work, the part that had listened to Ava Lambert, the part that had smiled when the teen boy thanked her with his eyes, that part understood. This wasn't just about Lionel. This was about every person she had dismissed too quickly. Every context she hadn't asked for. Every voice she hadn't made room for. Her hand moved slowly to the desk phone. She found the number printed at the bottom of the review. Her finger hovered over the keypad. And then she dialed. It rang once. Twice. U.S. Attorney Creston's office. "This is Judge Rosalind Drexler," she said, her voice steady. "I'm calling to speak with Mr. Creston. It's about his letter." There was a pause. "Please hold." A few moments later, Lionel came on the line. "Judge Drexler," he said, cautious but composed. "I received your submission," she began. "And I wanted to tell you personally. I read every word. You didn't have to write it, but you did. And it mattered. I appreciate that, Lionel replied. I meant it. I made a mistake, she said plainly. Not in the citation, but in how I handled it. I forgot something important. And I'm trying to remember again. The line was quiet for a moment. Most people wouldn't have called, Lionel said softly. But growth rarely makes noise. Sometimes the quietest things change the biggest rooms. I want to thank you, she said. Not just for your grace, but for holding a mirror. I needed it. It's not about being perfect, Lionel said. It's about paying attention. They spoke for a few more moments. The formality remained, but beneath it, something warmer had begun to build, mutual respect earned through accountability. After they hung up, Rosalind sat still, the dial tone gone but the moment lingering like heat after sun. That Monday, she entered courtroom 2B differently. Still firm. Still focused. But now, she greeted her clerk by name. Asked the bailiff how his daughter's school recital had gone. When the first case came forward, a man in his late 50s with a minor trespassing charge and a history of mental health struggles, Rosalind did something she hadn't done in years. She asked questions. He wasn't a name on a docket anymore. He was a person. And justice, finally, was starting to look like something alive. The weeks that followed didn't rewrite decades of practice, but they rewrote something deeper, how Judge Rosalind Drexler saw the bench. She had always believed in fairness. In the letter of the law. But now, she was learning that justice wasn't just about rules, it was about presence. She was still efficient. Still respected. But now people noticed she lingered a little longer before issuing a ruling. She didn't just ask what someone had done. She began to ask why. Her chambers felt different, too. She opened her windows more often. Took her lunch at the long table in the break room instead of behind a locked door. People still dipped their voices when she entered, but more often, she joined in, small comments, a shared laugh. Not every day, but enough to be felt. One afternoon, while sorting files for the upcoming docket, her clerk Rita stepped in with a hesitant knock. Judge? You've got something here you'll want to see. Rosalind looked up. Rita held out an envelope. It had no official seal. Just a simple handwritten name in black ink. Ava Drexler. Rosalind's heart caught. Inside was a card. Not formal. Just a folded note with pen marks that trailed slightly, like her daughter had written it in a hurry between classes or calls. Hey Mom. That night you replied to my message, something felt different. I wasn't sure what it was, but when we spoke later, I could hear it in your voice. You sounded lighter. Softer. I don't know what changed, and maybe it's not my place to ask, but I'm proud of you. I've always respected you. But now I feel like I know you. I hope we talk more. I miss that. Love, Ava. Rosalind read it twice, her throat tightening. Ava hadn't needed an apology. She'd simply noticed a shift. That meant more than anything else that had happened in the past few months. That night, Rosalind returned home, poured herself a cup of tea instead of wine, and sat at the kitchen table where Ava used to do her homework. She looked around the room, at the old wall calendar still turned to the wrong month, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the house was just a place she passed through. It felt like home. The next morning, the courtroom ran like usual. Speeding tickets, parking violations, minor disputes. But one moment stood out, a woman named Karina Reyes stood before her with a citation for jaywalking. A single mother. 2 jobs. She had brought her daughter with her, a sleepy-eyed kindergartner holding a juice pouch. Rosalind could have processed it in 60 seconds. Instead, she asked a question. Ms. Reyes, what's been going on lately? The woman blinked. No judge had ever asked her that. Tears welled. She explained, Her shifts had changed, daycare hours didn't match up, she had to cross the street near the grocery store to avoid missing the bus and being late for work. Rosalind nodded. Let's dismiss the citation. But more importantly, there's a program in Precinct 5. Free morning transportation for working parents. Ask the bailiff for the brochure on your way out. Karina's mouth opened, but no words came. Just a stunned whisper, thank you. The little girl tugged her mom's sleeve and smiled shyly at Rosalind. And the judge, formerly known for her chill and her distance, smiled back. That afternoon, Rosalind received a calendar invite from the Arizona Legal Association. Western States Prosecutor Summit, Fall Session Panel Discussion. Topic: Reframing Judicial Discretion in High-Volume Courtrooms. Keynote: Assistant U.S. Attorney Lionel Creston. Invitees encouraged to attend, including municipal judges. She clicked yes. Later that week, Lionel called. This time, not about an apology. Just a check-in. I'll be speaking next month, he said. You'll be there. I said I would, didn't I? She replied. He chuckled. You did. There was a beat. I think a lot of people expect fireworks at these events, Lionel said. Rosalind smiled faintly. Fireworks are loud. Change isn't. Not real change. He paused. That's what I said in my last speech, he admitted. That justice doesn't always wear a robe or carry a badge. Sometimes, it shows up quietly, when someone listens. The conversation drifted into silence, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was settled. That weekend, Rosalind sat on her back patio with a legal journal in one hand and a call from Ava on speakerphone. They talked about everything but court. Ava's new apartment. A stray cat that kept sneaking onto her balcony. The professor who wouldn't grade on time. And when Ava paused and said, "You sound like you're breathing again," Rosalind didn't deflect. She just smiled and said, "Maybe I am." Sometimes, change doesn't begin with a fight. It begins with a question. A pause. A mistake owned out loud. This wasn't a story about who outranked whom, it was about who chose to lead through humility. Lionel Creston never demanded respect. He commanded it, through silence, through presence, through grace. And Judge Rosalind Drexler? She learned the hardest, quietest truth: justice begins when we start seeing people, not just cases. When power is used with integrity, it doesn't need to raise its volume, it just has to show up. If this story moved you even a little, share it. Let someone else hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, because the most powerful stories aren't always loud. They're the ones that linger.